We're calling this series of Sanganites Dharma for Difficult Times. And this talk is, well, I thought it was called Help from Beyond, but Strength from Beyond will do. Strength from Beyond. So, you know, we're all now living through difficult times, some of us more than others. And when times get really hard, we may feel we don't have the resources to cope by ourselves. We may feel overwhelmed. At times like that, we could use some help. And of course, we may get help from other people, especially if we're part of a Sangha. But, you know, sometimes other people can't help us that much. Sometimes they've got their own problems. And there are some things that other people just can't help us with. But the Dharma gives us ways to get help that don't depend on other people. And it's one of those ways that I'd really like to talk about tonight. What I'd like to talk about tonight is how the Dharma can give us a way to get resources like strength and compassion and wisdom, as it were, from beyond our present personality, from beyond the person we are now, from beyond our present limitations. And one way that we can access these resources from beyond ourselves is by connecting with the rich array of archetypal figures which Buddhism offers us. Figures that embody the various qualities of enlightenment, each with their own characteristics, their own shape, their own color, their own mantra, which we can connect with. And as we connect with them, we can evoke some of their qualities, some of their strength, or energy, or forbearance, or courage, or wisdom. And these are figures like Q. Edward Manjughosha. The gentle-voiced bodhisattva of wisdom, who cuts off our rubbish thoughts with his extremely subtle sword, and whispers gently in our ear, wisdom, if we can be quiet enough to hear it. Or Prajnaparamita. The female embodiment of the highest wisdom. Or Tara. Oops, very small Tara. The female embodiment of active compassion. Above the world, but always stepping down into the world to help. Or Padmasambhava, the sort of royal, slightly scary archetype of the magician and the guru, full of energy, full of sort of motion. Or Amitabha, the warm red Buddha of the warm emotions associated with the sunset. Or Akshobhya, the immovable, with that cool, clear wisdom of dawn. He's represented at dawn, touching the earth, he's immovable. Or the mysterious Amoghasiddhi, the Buddha of the north, who gives us energy and fearlessness. He's holding his hand in the mudra of granting fearlessness. Or Ratnasambhava, the Buddha of beauty and abundance. And of course, the historical Buddha, Shakyamuni. Lovely picture of Shakyamuni from the Gandharan tradition. So if you've been around Buddhism for a while, you can put me back now if you like. I know he's handsomer than me, but if you've been around Buddhism for a while, you'll be familiar with some of those figures. And you may have experience of chanting their mantras from the times we come together to do pujas or festivals or retreats. And you may be familiar with the surprising effect that mantra chanting can have. But if you're relatively new to the Dharma, this may all come as a bit of a surprise. You may be thinking, this is where it all gets too weird. You knew there was going to be a catch somewhere. Well, so I'll try to reassure you. Firstly, you don't have to be into this aspect of the Dharma if it really doesn't suit your temperament. But at least keep an open mind. At least keep an open mind. Don't dismiss all this until you have some experience of what I'm talking about. So don't prejudge. Don't be prejudiced, okay? Be open to it. So you might want to stay and just listen to what I'm going to talk about. Secondly, I'll say that you don't have to believe anything about the nature of these figures. If you want to think of them of deep aspects of yourselves, of your own mind, that's fine. If you're open to thinking of them as deep forces in the universe, well, that might be more powerful, and that's also fine. Buddhism doesn't really recognize the difference. The inner and the outer are all part of the same reality. So I'm not going to get into a discussion about the ontology of those figures. I haven't got time, really. The ontology means the sort of nature of their being. They're not gods, but I'll say they're not gods and goddesses in the usual sense. And they don't exist, they certainly don't exist in the way that a vacuum cleaner or a washing up bowl exists. Okay, you can't kick them. But then we really have no idea of the way that a vacuum cleaner or a washing up bowl exists. To quote an order member that I'll refer to later, of course these figures are not real, but they are more real than you and me. Make of that what you like. And anyway, what does real mean? So there's not much point in speculating and theorizing, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. For many people, including people like myself, who started out as a profoundly skeptical, sort of pseudo-scientific person, having a connection with one or more of those figures can have a powerful effect, helping us to grow towards our full potential and giving us resources we need to cope with difficult times. If you're relatively new to the Dharma, you probably won't feel any connection with any of these figures, except perhaps the historical Buddha. But you may well have some sort of feeling for the Buddha, or you probably wouldn't be here. So we've all seen images of the Buddha, and we probably all have some sense of what he represents. So cultivating a connection with the historical Buddha would be a good place to start. And it might be a good place to end, actually. It might be a good place to end as well, because having a connection with the Buddha is enough. It's enough in itself, certainly enough for many people. So using our imagination to call to mind the Buddha can give us a glimpse. It can give us a hint of what enlightenment might be like. It may well give us a more powerful glimpse of what enlightenment might be like than any number of words telling us about the Buddha's wisdom or the Buddha's compassion or the Buddha's forbearance. So our what happens is that our imaginal idea of the Buddha can speak to, as it were, our inner Buddha. It can speak to our potential to become a Buddha. It can get an echo from our potential for enlightenment, what sometimes called the Buddha, our Buddha nature. It can stir it up. It can wake it up. And in this way, we experience at least a glimpse of what it might be like to be more enlightened, directly, in a way that words cannot communicate. And this glimpse, this experience, that glimpse, can be our best protection, the supreme protection in difficult times. Because the Buddha was said to be above all worldly happenings whatsoever. He was somehow above what was happening around him. Not indifferent, not passive, always responding creatively, with compassion, with wisdom, but somehow untouched in his deeper being, as though he really existed in a higher realm, He was in the world, but not of the world. So he was not really affected in his inner being by what happened around him. He belonged to a higher dimension, if you like. And if by getting a connection with the Buddha, we can experience a bit of an echo of that in ourselves, then calling on this in a difficult situation can be a very, very real protection. So we can ask ourselves in a difficult situation, we can ask ourselves, well, how would the Buddha have been in this situation? And then, as it were, step into those bigger shoes. And we may find then that the way we respond to that difficult situation will be transformed. We have no control over the situations. We do have a control over how we react. So I'll give you a bit of an example from my own experience of how that can work. And this happened a long time ago when I was involved in a Dharma project, and we were living in the mountains of Spain. So I was out in our Land Rover. We had a really dodgy Land Rover, in fact, two really dodgy Land Rovers. And I was going to some sort of appointment. I can't even remember what the appointment was, but I was often the one who had to go out and do minor official things because I speak reasonable Spanish. Anyway, I was out in the middle of nowhere in Spain on the way to this appointment when the Land Rover got a flat tire. Okay, that in itself was a bit annoying and frustrating because now I'd probably be late, and I didn't expect it would be that easy to change the wheel on this sort of heavy old Land Rover with its rusty old jack, etc. But anyway, I got out the jack and the spare tire and changed the wheel, only to discover that the spare tire was also flat. Someone had had a puncture and not got the tire repaired. I was in the middle of nowhere, before mobile phones. I was going to miss an appointment, and it was all due to somebody's irresponsibility. Now, I have to say that my normal response to this situation would be a toxic mix of anger, blame, and anxiety about missing the appointment and what the dickens was I going to do. But for some reason, it sort of popped into my mind. I didn't try to do this, but for some reason, the thought popped into my mind, how would the Buddha be in this situation? And suddenly, there was no point in worrying about it. Suddenly, all that toxic stuff dissolved. Suddenly, there was no point in worrying about the appointment because I wasn't going to make it. And it was a beautiful day in a beautiful part of Spain. And I could go for a walk. I could go for a walk and find some help. Find a phone, get some help, and then I could go back and I could just sit there and enjoy the weather and the scenery. The experience was transformed. I really enjoyed my afternoon, which was very different from the way I would have felt if not for that small, dim echo of the Buddha's aboveness that I experienced. This protected me from my usual mental states, which otherwise would have caused me a lot of suffering. So you might just want to try that in any sort of uncomfortable or difficult situation. Just try thinking, how would the Buddha respond in this situation? And step into those bigger shoes. That can be a great protection. It's a bit like getting a non-stick coating. Everything sort of just slides off. So yeah, we can all find extra resources in ourselves from the example of the Buddha. But for those of you who've been around a bit longer, you'll have come across some of the other figures I've been talking about. And you'll probably have some experience of mantras from our practice together in pujas and festivals and so on. So, okay, you may not feel any particular connection with any one of these figures, but I would encourage you to see if you can develop some sort of connection, because that can have a really big effect on our practice. And if you already feel any sort of connection to one of those figures, I would encourage you to really try to deepen it. Because invoking these figures the sort of figures that I showed you earlier, but that's just a subset of the figures in that Buddhist tradition. Invoking these figures, letting them perfume our mind, can be a powerful way of discovering new resources in ourselves, connecting with our potential, if you like, for wisdom and metta and energy and courage and strength. Doing that in a way that words on the page really cannot match. Somehow, connecting with these figures by using our spiritual imagination, our faculty of spiritual imagination, perhaps using the mantras that can bring these figures actually into our mind, that can give us a very direct, very alive experience of different ways of being, a direct experience of potentials and resources we can tap into that we just aren't usually in contact with, that we didn't even know we had. Of course, it's not compulsory. As I said, you can practice the Dharma without doing this, but you might want to give it a try. So you might want to read about these figures. You might want to read about these figures and watch out for any sense of fascination that arises from any of them, either with the figure themselves or with any of the things associated with that figure. What they hold, any animals they're associated with, their time of day, and so on, all the things about them. Find out about them. Watch for that sense of, that's fascinating. I'm drawn to that. That figure is drawing me towards them. Watch out for that and then pursue it a bit. So if you can get hold of, and I meant to bring this book down here, if you can get hold of a book called Meeting the Buddhas by Vadanya, a guide to the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and Tantric deities. If you haven't already got it, get it. On eBay, on whatever, get it. It's now out of print, very unfortunately, and divided into 3 separate books, which makes it way more expensive. But even so, it's still worth buying even as separate books. It's by a guy called Vesantara, and it's called Meeting the Buddhas. And I'm not quite sure what the 3 bits are called. I think it might be Meeting the Buddhas, Meeting the Bodhisattvas, and Meeting the Tantric deities or something. So read about the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Watch out for any sense of connection and then do what you can to deepen that connection. So for instance, if Ratnasambhava, the Buddha of beauty and abundance, golden Buddha holding a jewel, color of sunshine, surrounded by sort of abundance and giving to the world, if that figure appeals to you, well, look at any jewels you can find. Don't steal them, but look at any jewels you can find. Look into their depths, get a sense of what they represent. They're like frozen light. Go and look at horses. Horses are Ratnasambhava's animal. Spend time watching horses, connecting with their beauty and their dignity. So he's golden in color. So look out for that golden color out there in the world. The color of sunshine. There's lots of it around. Color of ripened barley. Get a sense of the nurturing warmth and abundance. If you feel attracted to Tara, the female personification of active compassion, now is a really good time to experience her green color and really get a sense of what that communicates. Go into an ancient wood. Go into an ancient wood and feel the relief from the glare of the sun as you enter that different world. Feel the calming effect of the green light, the sense of peace, the relief from the heat. Listen to the gentle sound of the leaves rustling in the wind, in the breeze, and the bird song. Or if Amitabha, the red Buddha of the warm emotions, speaks to you, well, his time of day is the sunset. So make a point of spending time outside at sunset, looking at the beauty of the sky and feeling the peace that descends on the world as the sun goes down. So you could do that sort of thing for whichever figure you feel even slightly attracted to, and that will deepen your connection. That will deepen your connection with this figure. And then maybe you might want to use the mantra of that figure as a way of raising the mind to a higher level. We can do that whenever we remember, at the bus stop, while in the dentist's waiting room, in the traffic jam. I'm told that one meaning of mantra, I gather, is mind protection. And mantras can protect the mind from the rubbish thoughts that come up at such times, the irritation and the blaming and the anxiety and so on. And we can also bring these figures into our meditation. If we feel that connection with them, we've found a bit out about them, we can bring them into our meditation. So we can do the metta bhavana or the mindfulness of breathing in the presence of Manjughosha, the Buddha of wisdom, or Tara or Padmasambhava, or of course the Buddha, And some of their influence will perfume our mind with their wisdom, their compassion, or their energy. It will raise our mind subtly to a new level. So when I do the mindfulness of breathing, sometimes I imagine Manjughosha, the Bodhisattva of wisdom with his sword. I imagine him sitting above my head and using his subtle sword to cut off each rubbish thought that pops up in my mind, bursting it like a balloon and liberating its energy so that I come back to my focus with a brighter mind for each swipe of his sword. Or when I do the metta bhavana, like many people, I find the first stage probably the most difficult. Because metta seems something I can direct outwards quite naturally to others, but not something I can sort of turn back in on myself. But if I imagine myself in the presence of a higher being, an infinitely compassionate and infinitely understanding being, and allow myself to feel bathed in the metta that this being feels for me, I somehow share in this metta. I share in this metta for me. I experience it vicariously. And then as I move through the stages, I can join the little trickle, the little stream of my metta with the great river of metta that's flowing from this higher being towards the other people in my meditation. And my metta seems multiplied many, many times. In any meditation, we can call the Buddha to mind. It's said that there's a sort of myth, a tradition that the Buddha is said to have sat on what's called the diamond throne as he attained enlightenment. And it's said that any meditation cushion is, as it were, a sort of franchise, an outreach branch of that diamond throne. So every time we sit on a meditation cushion, something of the Buddha's enlightenment comes down through us. We are perfumed by that Buddha's enlightenment. So we can bring that to mind as we meditate. There's a connection to the Buddha just from our very seat. It's a branch establishment of the diamond throne. So these are all ways that we can call on forces that are beyond the person that we are now, to deepen our practice and to take it to a higher level, even when times are not hard. But in difficult times, there are also ways that we can draw on our connection with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to give us strength and resources that would be beyond us otherwise. And one way we can do this, shock horror, is by praying. Don't switch off. Don't switch off. Buddhism does not have a creator God that we pray to. I'm not talking about that, and I'm not talking about praying to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to win the lottery or to have a Porsche or to get that job we're after, if we want those things just for ourselves. We might think, well, praying would be quite alien to Buddhism, maybe even un-Buddhist, and what good could it possibly do anyway? But Sangharakshita, the founder of our movement, said about this that if we feel the urge to pray to a Buddha or Bodhisattva, we should just pray and sort out the Buddhology later. And then Subhuti, one of Sangharakshita's senior disciples, took that even further and said that if we feel like praying to a Buddha or Bodhisattva, we should just pray and forget about the Buddhology altogether, because we'll never figure it out. If we pray to a Buddha or Bodhisattva for strength, or for compassion, or for courage, or for the wisdom that we need to face a difficult situation, or to be free from some pattern that drags us down, or for equality, the birth of a quality that we need, or for anything else that might align us, as it were, with the positive currents in the universe, then why not? Why not do it? And we might be surprised by the results. Because what we're doing, what are we doing when we pray for something positive? We're trying to align, as it were, the small stream of our will with a much more powerful current coming from somewhere beyond the limited person that we are at the moment. If you like, we can think of this as bringing up hidden potentials in ourselves. If you like to think of it that way, we can think of archetypal figures as aspects of our own deeper being, which we're not usually in touch with, and we can think of praying as calling upon them to help us, if we like to think of it that way. Or we can think of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as positive forces out there in the universe, positive forces out there in the universe, which we can invoke, which is actually much more like what it feels like when we do this, because whether it comes from inside or outside, any help we get does come from beyond our present personality. So it's experienced as coming from outside. And as I said, ultimately, Buddhism doesn't recognize a difference. Inside or outside are really not separate. We're part of something much bigger than ourselves. And this something much bigger than ourselves is part of us. So I hope I've managed to convey in this brief talk a bit of how using our spiritual imagination can connect to the Buddha and to the rich array of archetypal figures that Buddhism offers us. How it can be a powerful Dharma tool for difficult times and for good times as well. And next week, we're going to hear from 3 people talking about how their relationship with a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva has helped them. So please zoom in again next Tuesday. And in the meantime, you might want to experiment with some of the things I've been talking about myself. You might want to try and get hold of something that tells you about the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Read it, notice any sense of fascination, connection. Deepen that by paying attention to the things that the sort of things associated with them, and perhaps bringing them into our meditation, etc., etc. So you might want to try some of those things this week. And in the meantime, as I said, do come back next week, zoom in again next week, and have a good week. So thank you.